none of them are wrong. Like that is, like this is, it reminds me of that famous problem in inference, right? Where you say like the chicken wakes up every morning and it gets fed by the farmer. So it's going to assume that it's going to wake up every morning, get fed by the farmer, and it never expects the axe, to fall and it's going to become dinner that night, right? Because you can't, like that. There's a failure
just beyond your horizon
to do inductive reasoning, right? Because like you've never experienced this beyond your horizon. And in some ways that is what's happening in this book, like where it's saying this actually is how God was running the world, basically. And everyone thought they were wise because that they actually were conformed. I mean, we could talk about like Raveki.
I wake up and the farmer gives me food. What do you want?
Like this is how it works. And then suddenly, like, and this is why, like, if you look at like Eliphaz's first speech, right off the bat, he says things that just like, does God punish? Does God punish the righteous? Let me find the passage for a second. It's just like a very simple thing. Is like the righteous never get what in this. Recall now, one who is clean have they ever perished? Has the one who's been upright ever been destroyed? And it's just like it's almost like the problem.
Never knew a good man that died.
Yeah, like no good man has ever died before. Like there's no problem with theodicy in this world, except and until God makes this sudden choice to break his own rules, essentially.
Welcome to Grail Country. My guests today are Jess and Yosef. Sherry was supposed to join us, but she wasn't able to make it. But this is going to be like a warm-up conversation for the conversation that we're going to have on stage at Southeastuary, where Jess and Sherry are going to dialogue about the Book of Job. And because the Book of Job is a very potentially almost infinite thing to talk about, I have given it the subtitle, Job as a Mediator. So the focus is going to be on Job, whether Job is or is not a mediator, and how so in the Book of Job. Because my understanding is that Yosef does not necessarily agree with the proposition that Job is a mediator. So, Jess, as our resident Job expert, why don't you get the ball rolling here?
All right. Yosef and I have talked a lot about the Book of Job together. So we've discussed the mediator aspect of it quite a bit. And just for the viewers, the mediator role that Job plays is in the very beginning. It's noted when he makes the sacrifices for his children. His children have these feasts. It appears that his children are doing well. There's no outward signs of folly or sin, but Job offers sacrifices on their behalf just in case, sort of thing, in case they had sinned in their hearts. So not an outward sin, but a sin inwardly. And so Job does this. It seems as, he's just trying to keep the world in order, so to speak. And it's one of the tragedies of the story, because his mediation doesn't really work to keep them safe. They end up perishing. Satan talks to God, and Satan makes the accusation that Job is not really a righteous man. He's just doing it for the benefits that a righteous man gets, the rewards. And so God puts everything into his hands and Satan takes it all away. So that's one aspect of the mediation. Then at the end, you get another picture of a mediation where Job acts as sort of a priestly role for his friends. God is not happy with the friends at the very end and says, "You didn't speak right like my servant Job has. Therefore, bring a sacrifice, and then my servant Job will pray for you, and I will accept his prayer and not deal with you as you deserve." So he sort of plays this role as offering a prayer up to God for his friends that it appears that maybe God would have punished them in some way if Job's prayer wasn't offered. So that's another way he acts as a mediator. And those kind of bookend the story there. And even it's a little bit in contrast. Well, and in the middle part, Job, in his confusion and in his lamenting, he's asking God to give him knowledge, basically, of what is going on, what is happening. He says things like, "My path is darkened, the way is hidden from me." This is all language saying that he doesn't know, he doesn't have the ability to figure out what's happening. And so in a few parts, he imagines a mediator in heaven, or no, it's the witness in heaven and the mediator on the earth in two different parts. And he desires a mediator to go between him and God in order to sort this whole thing out. Because he sort of proposes, I could, if God came to me and we spoke face to face, like he wouldn't listen to me. And then even if he did listen to me, I wouldn't be able to get my words out. And if I did get my words out, they would still be used against me. I wouldn't be clear enough. And so he's like, he's just daunted by the face-to-face confrontation with God. And so he says, if only there was a mediator that could stand between us, that could sort this out. The picture is someone, a third party, and he says if he could lay his hand on us both. So lay one hand on me, one hand on God, and then provide some sort of compromise, ruling, judging on the situation. But he even backs off on that. He's like, it's impossible. Like, because who could mediate with God? Who would be in the place that would be able to mediate with God as one of the parties? So those are some of the things that come up, like just factually in the story, about mediation. And it's interesting thinking of Job in his role as mediator, his desire for a mediator, and and then well, I'll just leave it there and see if Yosef has anything he wants to add or anything yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are two other kind of bits to the story about me. Actually, maybe three other kind of characters in the mediation story, or its lack thereof. One is his wife, Job's wife. I think actually tries to be a mediator. Now we could say that she's, quoting Satan, or there's some weird things going on there. But maybe even Satan is a form of mediator at the beginning of the story, in some sense. But she does have Job's best interests at heart in at least her perception of what his best interest is, which is telling him to, if you just curse God and die, like this will all be over. She is trying to be a mediator, which is kind of a challenging way to read her, maybe. But there's also in Eliphaz, so the first of the friends, and his prophetic vision that he gets starting in chapter 4 into 5, he tells Job, pretty explicitly, there's no point in trying to have it. There's no other mediators possible. There's no forget the angels. God won't listen to the angels. He won't listen to men. You have to the only one you can appeal to directly is God. He tells him that right from the very beginning of the book. And we can talk about kind of Eliphaz's prophecy and how it sort of sets up the book. But I'd like to. But he definitely already frames this challenge of the lack of other potential mediators out there. And then when we might also talk about is wisdom a potential mediator, or at least one that is an imagined mediator. in the book as a character almost. Not that wisdom is anthropomorphized in this book, certainly not the way it is in Proverbs 8 or anything like that. It's never anthropomorphized, in fact, as far as I can remember in the book of Job. But wisdom still is seen as something that has special, or that God has special access to, and man does not, especially in the middle chapters. And Job wants that wisdom. He wants that connection with God through wisdom, but it's not. I shouldn't say wisdom. This is probably, it's not actually really. If we're going to really use terms here, maybe we should be more careful, because in Hebrew there's different terms for different parts, right? So he's appealing to chachma, which often translated as wisdom, but is actually it's closer maybe to, I don't know, maybe it's closer to Sophia, maybe it's not. Like there's a lot to talk about there, but I think that is wisdom as a potential mediator, or lack thereof, is another kind of part of the book.
Mm-hmm. Let me share a little bit of. Do you guys mind if I share a little bit of text here?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, this is not from Book of Job. This is from Meditations on the Tarot, letter 12. This is what Tomberg says about Job.
Is this the hanged man?
Correct. Yeah, he says the hanged man is the eternal Job, tried and tested from century to century, who represents humanity toward God and God toward humanity. The hanged man is the truly human man, and his lot is a truly human one. The hanged man is the representative of humanity, who was found between two kingdoms, that of this world and that of heaven. For that which is truly human in man and humanity is the hangman, and the hangman, and it is the hangman, he said thousands of years ago, has not man a hard destiny upon earth, and are not his days like the days of a hireling, like a slave who longs for the shadow, and like a hireling who looks for his wages. Oh, that my words were written, oh, that they were inscribed in a book, oh, that with an iron pen and lead that they were given on the rock forever. My foot has held fast to his steps. I have kept his way and not turned aside, for I know that my Redeemer lives, and at last he will stand upon the earth. And after my skin has been thus destroyed, and then from my flesh I shall see God, whom I shall see on my side, and my eyes shall behold, and not another. My heart faints within me in expectation, which is a quotation from Job. So for Tomberg, I think I brought that up in the context of you bringing up wisdom, Yosef, because like there's a way in which it is wisdom. It is the human capacity, that wisdom that allows us to serve as a mediator between heaven and earth, which I think is what Job, as a quintessential hangman, is to be seen as a representative of. So
I'm gonna disagree.
Of course.
And I know Jess has heard this before. In light of the conversation that, or the question that Jess asked to John Vervaeke, and then Paul and John discussed a little bit on stage at Southeastuary, and I'm getting the second hand, obviously, it wasn't there.
Sure.
But this has launched a kind of a discussion between me and Jess that Job is an anti-wisdom book, at least in the sense of wisdom that the way Vervaeke uses it, or the book of Proverbs uses it, or even Ecclesiastes. Job is also we also have discussed it as an anti-liturgy book and an anti-prophecy book. And what I mean by that is something very specific. I mean, three different specific aspects, but they kind of all tie together.
Yeah, I think we're using wisdom in a different sense, though.
Right. The wisdom of Job this is not the wisdom of, if you do this, this is how things will work out. You can rely on this to get your results, because Job is all about the point where that breaks down. Right.
And when we're talking about the kind of wisdom that allows us to commune with the divine, it is not that kind of wisdom.
That I'm not so sure. The book actually presents both sides of that. Right. So the book does argue that there's access to the divine through wisdom by observing nature. And Job, though, will not ultimately be able to access that, because even there, like, he can't see beneath the mountains and he can't see beyond the sea, right? There's a limit to how much he can probe nature. but there is some wisdom, and not just that, also through keeping commandments, like not commandments in the mitzvot sense, but like commandments in like doing the things that are supposed to be good, observing justice, feeding the orphan, feeding the the poor, doing righteousness in his gate. Right, there's that whole chapter where it seems like he's doing all the good things, and there is something good in there. There's something connection. There's some participation with the divine in that wisdom, but then there's this other type of wisdom the book is positing that's beyond that he can't reach. Right, the second type of wisdom. And this book really, right, like it takes these things that seem to be good things. These are the things, that the book of Proverbs, for instance, or the Torah would say, like, do these commandments. And it says, like, you can do them, but you're not, like, don't think that you can understand the mechanisms behind, like, why the outcomes come out the way they do, because you're not going to. And in a stronger way than even Ecclesiastes does. Ecclesiastes says the same thing, but Ecclesiastes says, like, find a way to be happy, even in those moments, where there is some joy, even if it's temporary. Job pushes that to the next level, right? And says that's not good. It's also an anti-prophetic. I want to go through all three first quickly, though. So it's anti-wisdom, anti-prophecy, and anti-liturgy are actually tied together. And by prophecy, I don't mean that there's no experience of the divine in the book. I mean that Jews, right, do not put the book of Job in the section of the prophets, just like we don't put Daniel in the section of the prophets. And that's because a prophet isn't just someone who gets to hear God and makes a prediction and, like, it's right or something like that. Like a prophet is a role. It's a specific mediating role. As we're talking about mediators, to be in the section of the prophets in the Bible for us is that you have a message that is communicable to people, that it helps lead them in, like, pedagogically to have a good life, to listen to God, to obey his will, all those things. Job fundamentally cannot be that book. Job is, you're not good, like, nothing in this book will help you in that path. There's no pedagogy there. That's the book of Proverbs, and that's the Proverbs that's not actually in the book of prophets, because it comes out of natural wisdom as opposed to revelation, but, like, you're not going to get there. One of the really big things that separates Job from other prophecies, and the reason he's not in the prophets, in some sense, I would posit, is because you have lots of symbolic prophecies where it says, okay, like, this is going to happen. Ezekiel, your wife's going to die, and that as you relate to her, that will be like how you mourn for Jerusalem, how the people of the nation will mourn for Jerusalem. Or Hosea, marry the prostitute, right? Like, God tells something beforehand, and he sets up the symbolism, and then kind of it gets carried out, and the kind of emotional valences and psychological and revelation, all those things play out in that sense. Job does not get any warning that any of this is going to happen. Right? He's not a prophet even in that basic sense. The only prophecy in the whole book, until the end where God reveals himself, the only prophecy is to Eliphaz, which happens in a dream. And he seems to maybe misunderstand what's going on in that dream, but it is a real prophecy, it seems. The book seems to support that he's the only prophet in the text, which is weird to think about, that his friend is the prophet, and his friend who's a prophet is going to speak poorly or wrongly or improperly or not in the ready sense, whatever, however we understand the end book language. So if we can't use it pedagogically, and it's not really about this wisdom, then it's also an anti-liturgy. We don't pray with the words of Job. You can't, like, what he and I really like. Maybe Jeff. I'll let Jeff make his point about, like, what he thinks about the words of Job, because I know he has a nice point on this. But I would just sort of lay that groundwork. Like, it's really interesting in Jewish prayer, we sometimes quote the book of Job in our liturgy. It's almost always his friends. It's his friends who are saying great things about God, that God is powerful, that he makes, numerous things without wonder, that are marvelous, that he unfurls, the night sky, like these very positive, powerful statements about God and nature that in any other book of the Bible would be totally acceptable, especially in Psalms, right? Like, we would, like, say that this is a great piece of liturgy. We don't quote Job, though, because Job's pain, his suffering, isn't, like, it's so personal. It's so non-transferable, communicable, that it wouldn't mean much for us to just repeat his words, right? Like, that's not, a liturgy is something you can repeat and use, and just like wisdom is something you can repeat and use over and transfer to people. But Job is not a booklet. Job himself, his words, his character, his experiences cannot be transferred. His suffering is like I'd say like any suffering is unique in a way that can't be removed, and the words have to come from a place of integrity that can't just be copied, that can't just be reused. So I don't actually know that I love the whole use of him as an archetype or a hangman in some ways, because he's in some ways an anti like pattern where like nothing can replicate him in some sense. So anyway, I love your point about liturgy and Job and like what his words are for. I want you to make that before we.
I wonder. Let me know if this is the point. That like part of the way I think about what Job says and stuff, because he says some stuff that is pretty dark, stuff that you wouldn't repeat, like something you wouldn't like say, all right, Sunday school class, let's all repeat the words of Job's. The Lord has filled me with poison darts, and he charges at me like a warrior, and he gnashes his teeth at me and tears me to pieces. Like we don't, like Yosef was saying, we don't make a liturgy out of Job's words necessarily. Like the Orthodox Church, they quote Job during Holy Week, so in the week before the crucifixion, and that's interesting. But it's not in this liturgical sense of like it's a reading, but it's not necessarily done as a practice, like Yosef's saying. So, but one thing that's useful and about Job's words, and for some of the Psalms too, there's some Psalms that are very dark and terrifying, and cursing enemies and asking God why. But they allow you to actually become more aware of what's happening inside of you. So one thing that could happen, you go through something terrible, and you're not even necessarily aware of everything that's happening in you. Like this is usually the case. Like it takes you a while to process it. Maybe you need to talk to somebody. Maybe you need to go through a whole, talk to a therapist or your pastor, and who knows what you have to go through to process that. But like, it's like almost a miracle to me that the words of Job like make it into the Bible, because like Yosef or like you were saying, Nate, or in that quote, it's like it's a human story. It's so human. Like, so even though it can't be necessarily liturgical, like when I read these words, I could even like kind of be like, Job, you're going a little too far. I could be very uncomfortable with it, but I can't necessarily say like that's like what Job is saying is sort of he's reaching a limit to the human experience in terms of suffering, in terms of being confused, in terms of being in the dark and not having a purpose, a way forward, not understanding, not having wisdom of the situation. And then not only that, but he had a life where he devoted to wisdom, to righteousness and blamelessness and right action in the world, right practices, doing all the right things. And so all of his tools that he knew about, he had exhausted, and there was nothing left. And so what he's reduced to is a cry. That's all he has left. And so it's in that cry you have to start asking, what's wisdom when you've reached the end of your toolkit of wisdom? In terms of like when Vervaeke talks about wisdom, he talks about his practices, the different methods, I can't remember. Anyway, there's ways to achieve wisdom, and he's trying to revive these things because they've basically been lost to us in the West. We've reduced things down to information and trying to be smart, but and he asked the question, where do you go for wisdom? And so he's trying to revive these things. And he's like, I have benefited from his work in this, but I'm always just sort of thinking like, what happens when all those resources are used up? Then what? Then what do we do? And I think that's what Job is getting to. And it gets to this point where he's in this weird inverted upside down world where Job is saying the things you would expect a wicked person to say. His friends are saying the things that are liturgically and orthodox wise correct. Not all they say, but they're trying to do, the tradition, the correct thing to say. They're speaking right out of wisdom tradition, until they start accusing Job of wickedness. Basically everything they say is good. That's why you can quote the friends but just the way the story is set up, when like Eliphaz says all these wonderful things about God, he's like, if I were you, I would seek God. He does things beyond wonder, marvelous things that we can't understand. And so he starts going down. It's a beautiful passage. But in the context of Job just losing all of his children, you can just see the absurdity of it. And so this beautiful passage of the goodness of God, seeking him and him, blessing you and all this stuff, in this context, all of a sudden you realize it doesn't make sense. And so it throws you for this loop. Yeah.
I mean, and it's not just that it doesn't make sense. Like, as Job will say, right? Like, you are right before the section, or in many places, at least since I have chapter 19 open, so that's where the hangman is quoting from. Like, it says, like, he says to his friends, like, my friends detest me. You've turned against me. Pity me. You are my friends. Yet you pursue. And the hand of God has struck me. Why do you pursue me like God does? Like, he blames them as much, in some sense, maybe more, for like attacking him in that. Right? It's not that he wants in the section that the hangman is quoting from. It's not that he wants salvation. The Redeemer is not from God. He's asking for a Redeemer from the persecutions of his friends who are misusing their speech, their prophecy, their powers, their wisdom to emotionally, really, or psychologically, whatever, hurt him. Right? And there's it's just like it's not what you expect.
Yeah. There's that strange tension where he's complaining to God, and then he's also kind of saying to his friends, like, just wait till God finds out about what you're doing. And so he makes this sort of double action towards God as both he's my enemy who has struck me, and then also warning his friends against, like, at one part he warns his friends against being what is it called when you favor one party or another, and it
bias.
It's not bias. I forget when you would favor like a poor person because they're poor, or a rich person because they're rich, or anyway, yeah. He basically says,
bias. Yeah.
He's like, is God going to be happy with you that you looked at this situation and you were biased towards him? He's like, do you think God's going to be happy about that? Because he has this idea that God really actually cares about what is right and true, and not just about siding with, whoever's stronger. Like, this is something Job sort of just understands. So he makes these appeals like that to his friends, but then he's also like, but God has struck me.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, Greg, there is sorry, I'm going to come back to, but first you didn't quite go where I wanted with the anti-liturgy, and
what was the point you want me to
so something that Jess has told me before that I'm going to like spotlight here is what Job does as an even if we can't use his words for liturgy, is he gives us permission in a way that you don't really. You have some other places where this occurs in the Bible, but it's a very explicit permission almost to really to yell at God and to like say, God, like I demand justice, and like they're to really take God to task more in some ways than Abraham, though certainly echoing Abraham at Sodom, and to some degree, we see some parallels with a couple other places, especially there's 2 or 3 Psalms, right? Where we see that. And Lamentations is the other major place, these theodicies where people.
Well, Jeremiah too. Jeremiah will say stuff.
Yeah.
But Jeremiah may have been influenced by Job.
Or vice versa. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Never know. certainly Isaiah is. So yeah, there's this permission we get to wrestle with God, to struggle with God, to say things. And one of the like interesting things for the rabbinic tradition is like they ask, doesn't Job say things that are not appropriate to God? Like it's clear the book says his friends don't speak properly. But what about Job? And they basically say maybe, but he's in all this pain and like and in the midst of mourning and all this stuff, and like in that situation, it's like we don't hold someone to account for their words in that type of pain situation. Like that is, you should talk to God from your feelings. You should confront him in that way. And that's like fine. And we're not going to like start declaring him a heretic or something like ridiculous because, we don't think that he's speaking properly.
Right. Well, and also Job has a certain, he's doing it for a certain reason. It's to speak to God and have him respond. It's not to condemn God or in sort of a way he's not doing what his wife suggested, which is to curse God. And so when in his complaints, it's a literal complaint, as if a child was complaining to their parent about something unfair. And they're not saying, I don't want you to be my dad anymore. You know what I mean? And yeah.
He's not looking to cut off the relationship. He wants that. He cares about the relationship so deeply. He wants it to continue, and he just doesn't know how or where to go. There's so many places we could go with that.
Well, I know personally for me, like this is in my own faith, like if there will be times, I almost think that God does this on purpose, where things sort of break down for you in some way, large or small, because we have a tendency to just like get to know the rules, find a groove, just try to stay out of like, just like, I don't want to be in trouble. I don't want anything bad to happen to me. I don't, but we lose an authentic connection with God. And so there's a way in which the world reality, God breaks through, and it appears as if things are sort of breaking down and whatever. And if you're held back and holding on to like rules and like structures and stuff, you won't allow yourself to connect back to God as he connects to you. You'll draw back into and so like, it's not like you have to be like this all the time. People will, I think there's some people that try to do this. They try to just be authentic all the time toward God, and they're always yelling at him, and like being real is kind of weird. And I don't like, that's not right either, but there will be times where you have to authentically just speak out of your own perspective and how things truly seem to you, just because that's what a relationship is. Like you have to do those things, and it reestablishes it as a relationship and not just, a set of rules and stuff to just make sure your life goes right.
Yeah. Sorry. Nate, you haven't talked much. Do you want to?
Oh no, I'm processing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure. Just want to make sure we
want to be in a relationship.
So one might could even say that you're talking about. So there's the breakdown of his model of his world, and in fact, in the passage that Nate quoted, with the to the point where right before he will see God from his flesh, Right? His skin has peeled off or has rotted away, right? And one could even understand that, like that barrier, like the garments of skin, right? That layer between us and the world, right? That he's sure at some point, like someday, that will dissolve, and he'll like that one model of the world will disappear, and he will be able to kind of reformulate a new relationship with God. He doesn't seem to be there yet, right? He's looking forward to this, like as a like. It's interesting because it's almost like he's clinging to one model while wishing that it was no longer there.
Yeah.
And there's something really.
Do you think he does that because like it's either the friends are pressing him on that and pressing that model into the situation, or it's kind of like he's thought about that so much in those terms that he doesn't know how to.
Yeah, I still think he has it as part of him. I think one of the things I was just thinking about, I hadn't struck me before, but when you were talking, and it's like one of like the most innocuous, like at the beginning of the book, that the children, and so he's afraid that they're going to sin, and specifically he says they're going to sin and that they're going to curse God in their heart. He says that very explicitly there, and then, of course, his wife. Actually, before we move on to his wife, then all these bad things happen, and it's
Satan says that Job will curse God. Curse God in his heart.
God. Then, after the first set of calamities, because there's two sets, right? So for people who don't remember their books, so there's two sets of calamities. After the first set of calamities, Job has this very famous line. It's actually one of the very few liturgical lines that we do take from Job that we say at funerals, weirdly, that God has given and God takes away. Right? So there's that line. But it says he didn't, at that moment, after the first set of calamities, he doesn't sin, and he doesn't speak against God. I mean, it's a very weird word. It's actually the word for prayer. He didn't but it's understood as like like saying something negative about God, like an inverted prayer. And then, so he neither speaks it and he doesn't sin, implying seemingly from his heart. So he doesn't do either. Then his wife says, just curse God. And then after the second set of calamities, and then he does something really interesting. It's like he says, no, like, I won't do that. Like, you're a foolish woman. He calls her something not so nice, actually, if I remember. Shameless woman.
You speak as one of the foolish women who would speak.
Yeah, Nevelot. It's stronger than shameless. This is it's not a nice word. It's not like the worst word, but like it's if you remember, Naval is this guy in the David story who Abigail's originally married to.
Yeah.
So Naval is it's more than fool. It's like foolish with like a very strong negative connotation, like a sinful connotation. Anyway, so you're speaking in this like sinfully foolish way. But then it says he doesn't sin with his lips, and very careful. It doesn't say he doesn't sin anymore, and it doesn't say, right, like it's. So there is an implication that in his heart he might not feel so good about God in his heart anymore, but he's not letting those words pass his lips. Like that's his new line. But what's really interesting is already there. He was so afraid that his children would curse God in their heart, forget their lips, in their heart, and his model, I think, is already breaking at that point. His model, I mean, it's already broken from all the destruction, but I think we're being given a clue there, maybe, that like his model of like the thing that he was so afraid of his children would do and would lead to disaster, like everything's been inverted. He's had a disaster, and now he is cursing God in his heart, and yet he's not being destroyed for that. Like he actually isn't being killed for that. Like that God is allowing, right, and accepting, and like saying like that's not the problem. Like his model of the world and how sin worked was wrong. We already have a clue of that way up in the beginning of chapter 2.
That's interesting.
It seems that his previous model seems to be shared by the friends too, right? And it's a model that seems to presume that it's possible to keep suffering at bay if you do the right things. And he's actually trying to preemptively make sure that his children don't have anything befall them by sacrificing on their behalf.
Yes.
Just in case they did something that karmically would warrant suffering.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's preemptive though, because it's after the fact. And there's kind of a weird thing. Like, why isn't he doing all the work beforehand to make sure they're educated and careful, like to not mess up in the first place? Why is he? There is something weird, I think, at the beginning that like we could explore. Specifically, like the fact that they're having these feasts, which everywhere else in the Bible are associated as kind of sinful feasts. Like the other time we have this word for this. This is not just a feast. This is specifically a drinking feast, a mishta, and it's specifically associated with Achashverosh in the story of Esther and Haman, and we get it in with Pharaoh for his birthday in Genesis when Joseph's going to be brought out and they kill the baker.
But it isn't the invitation of the sisters sign that this isn't a debauchery or an excuse for debauchery. It's the
fact that it's a co-ed feast actually might make me think it's more likely to be debauchery. As that would make me think, because remember, even in Persia, if you're going to try to behave, the men and women are kept separately in these feasts. Mixing them is already a sign that like something, like that you're crossing the line.
Yeah.
That's why Vashti like refuses, right?
Like for me, like I like the idea that the feasts were authentic celebrations and that the invitation of the sisters was a sign of their wholesomeness. But then like it has this appearance of it could be bad. But I like the fact I see it as authentic celebration. Like
I'll say the word for feast here is never used for a positive celebration, except when it becomes redeemed at the end of the book of Esther, and then subsequently in the beginning of the book of Ezra, which is in theory after Esther, because Mordecai is mentioned in that book. So there is a redemption of this sort of feast, but this sort of feast before that point is always a negative like word. It's not like the type of feast you would have at the temple or with sacrifices. Like it's never that. So it depends on when you think the book of Job is written, maybe. And like the kind, right? Because if you think it's a early Second Temple book around the time of Ezra, like, and the idea of this word being redeemed has happened, it allows for a very different nuance than if you think it's a much earlier book.
But then wouldn't Job have sacrificed for their sins that he was aware that were apparent?
He's not invited. He doesn't know. he's worried.
Yeah, he's not.
But I also don't know if it matters because, like, on the one hand, like we can talk about this, like, did they do something good, bad, whatever?
Yeah.
But ultimately, like, that's not why he's punished. He's not punished for anything his children did. There's nothing. It's not even that he's punished. Bad things happen to him, but it's not because he did anything. So punishment's not even the right word. Like, if anything, he's being like punished for being good, right? Like, because he was good, God brought attention to him, and the whole set of events happens. So, like, in some ways, I don't even want to necessarily judge the kids as like good or bad. Like, it's ambiguous, but I don't know if it has.
Yeah, it is ambiguous. Well, and also when the friends bring up his kids, they say, if your children sin, then God has dealt with them accordingly. And he doesn't argue.
Nope.
He's very silent on it. But he does look back positively back on his life when his children were around. Like it's
sort of. There is that weird passage, I don't know what chapter it is, where he does talk about his children shunning him. And there was that weird section. So I don't know if it's consistent. We can also talk about whether it's literal and he means his own kids or, but there is that weird thing where he talks about his relationship with his wife and his children not actually going so well at some point.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't recognize him, right? That's part of that passage. My children like didn't like recognize, like honor me, like relate to me. Whatever.
Yeah. But also like I haven't. Job took care of lots of different people, and they were orphans and other folks that he sort of. And it also sort of talks about how his parents did this, that in his household he was raised among orphans and widows that his maybe father had taken care of. I can't remember if it was that explicit or not. And that it seems like Job continued this practice. He obviously took care of orphan and widows, but it seems like it may have been more than that they were welcomed into his house. And that that it was almost as if they were his children. I don't know if he would be able to refer to, or he's referring to them as children or not, but yeah.
Yeah, I was trying to think. There is. Sorry. I was trying to think if I could think of where the reference was. I have to look here, but there is this interesting thing, again, going back to chapter 1, where Satan literally says to God, this guy is so good that you reward him with all this stuff, and you fence him in, you protect him, and you give him all this wealth. And in some sense, at that point in the framing of the book, it seems like what we're being told is that actually is the way of the world. And as far as everyone knows, none of them are wrong. Like that is, like this is, it reminds me of that famous problem in inference, right? Where you say like the chicken wakes up every morning and it gets fed by the farmer. So it's going to assume that it's going to wake up every morning, get fed by the farmer, and it never expects the axe, to fall and then become dinner that night, right? Because you can't, like that. There's a failure
just beyond your horizon
to do inductive reasoning, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because like you've never experienced this beyond your horizon, and in some ways that is what's happening in this book, like where it's saying this actually is how God was running the world, basically, and everyone thought they were wise because that they actually were conformed. I mean, we could talk about like a Reiki.
I wake up and the farmer gives me food. What do you want?
Like this is how it works, and then suddenly, like, and this is why, like, if you look at like Eliphaz's first speech, right off the bat, he says things that just like, does God punish? Does God punish the righteous? Let me find the passage for a second. It's just like a very simple thing. Is like the righteous never get what in this. Recall now, one who is clean have they ever perished? Has the one who's been upright ever been destroyed? And it's just like it's almost like the problem.
I've never knew a good man that died.
Yeah, like no good man has ever died before. Like there's no problem with theodicy in this world except and until God makes a sudden choice to break his own rules, essentially.
That's where Girard's insight that we discussed before, that's where that comes to bear. Because you believe that your ability to believe that is because you're still tied to the scapegoating system, and I mean that's by definition. You don't see it and you don't question it, so you think that you do think that is how the world works, and you would never ever question that the innocent don't suffer.
Yeah, I almost think of when Satan says his accusation against Job, if he's not just communicating sort of a wider crisis in the world about this idea of being blessed for right action and right belief, or for his righteousness, because like it doesn't take, it's not that far of a leap to just say, oh, that guy's righteous only because he gets rewarded for it. He likes the reward. Like, and so this is so when Satan says this, it's almost as if they're inside everyone's heart in the community, in the area, is our sort of doubted the value of being righteous in itself, and only sees it as a game to be played in order to either not suffer, or just get stuff. And this is always the case. Like this is sort of a, and I always bring up the story in Knight's Tale where the guy who was the peasant who wants to become a knight, and so he's pretending to be a knight, but he goes to these tournaments. He meets this princess. He falls in love with her, and he's trying to like woo her. And so he comes up to her and he says, "I love you." And she's like, "You don't know anything about love." He's like, "No, I do. I love you. I love you so much. I will win this next tournament for you." And she says, "How do I know that you're not doing it for your own honor?" And he's like, "Well, obviously I'm just doing it for you. I mean, it would be good for me too, but I'm doing it for you. And she says, if you love me, then lose. And so it's all of a sudden he has to lose the tournament in order to prove his love. Like we're in an upside down world here. It's because like you can't see inside of people's hearts. And so if there's this crisis of people saying like, what's the benefit of being righteous? It's just a game to be played. And actually maybe someone who's really, really blessed, they're probably really, really corrupt. What's to say that they're not? And so what you have there is an eroding of people's desire to do the right thing for the right reasons in the right way. And so how do you fix this? Well, it's the princess saying to the guy, lose. And so then he loses, or he's losing the tournament. And then like halfway through him losing, she goes, oh, he loves me. And then she sends her maiden down and is like, and the maiden goes up and is like, my lady says win. and he's like all bruised up. And he's like, what are you talking about? I'm like half dead. And then he goes on to win or whatever. And it's almost a situation like that. In order to see the real righteousness of Job, he has to be like thrown through the gauntlet. And it's not necessarily because God doesn't know. Like, I don't like how people are like, God had to test him because God didn't know if he was righteous or not. I don't like that, because it's just like, God knows. But why does Job suffer then? Well, it's so we will know he's righteous, and why is, I think that's important specifically for this sort of mediation thing. Well, that's one aspect of it.
I think it's also so that he will know he's righteous. I mean, he's sure of it from a faith point, but it's not proven to him, and I think until like God comes to him, like, right? Until the thing that he wanted from the beginning is to summon God, and God would respond to him. When God finally comes and does that, even though God is saying like, you're not going to understand, like, this is beyond you, at the same time, God is saying, hey, this relationship is still matters to me. And even if you are of the dust, and even in the ashes, and even if you are a man of clay, and all of those things that have been said throughout this book, and even if, the thing that maybe Eliphaz got wrong at the very, very beginning, right, was that he says God doesn't pay attention, like, what's God care about men of clay or something like that. Right? So like that. Sorry, I'm trying to like see if I have it right
No,
here.
you're fine.
But yeah, like there's a
Did either of you catch the exchange I had with Dave B on Luke's stream the other day?
I did, but remind me of what the content.
Well, it had to do, like, Dave was kind of like bringing up the kind of the other meaning of suffering, right? So
to undergo.
Well, actually, to allow it to be, because like in when you say someone won't suffer fools, like that's a negation of suffering, like in that register. So, and he was relating that to like actually God's act of creation. And I'm wondering if it also, the other question I wanted to ask you guys is that maybe we should actually talk about what we mean when we say mediation. Because I don't know if the meaning of mediation is self-evident and obvious to everyone.
Oh, it's definitely not.
Okay, good. So it might be worth saying something about what we even mean when we say to mediate. And I think, and what I'm proposing is that there may be a link between mediation and this like idea of suffering, in the sense of to allow something to be.
Well, let me try to. All right, Job is a type. We talked about this in terms of like U-shaped journey or whatever. Another character in the Bible that takes a similar journey. We don't get all the details like we do with Job, like in the midst of his suffering, but Joseph follows a similar pattern, where he's the most beloved of his father's children. Even though he's the youngest, he gets the coat of many colors. He has these visions. He gets thrown into the pit, sold into slavery, rises back up to run Potiphar's house. But then there's one of these inversion things. It looks like he was improper. He was improper with Potiphar's wife because he left his coat and he ran off without it. But it wasn't the case. Anyway, he's framed, sent to prison. He's sort of forgotten and then eventually rises up. But the reason why I bring that up is because Joseph he doesn't deserve any of that. I won't get too deep into that, but we'll just sort of put it like he basically doesn't deserve in any of it. But then in Psalm 105, this is what it says. So Psalm 105 is going through the story from Abraham to when the children of Israel go into the promised land. And so it's sort of recounting all the stories. And so this is what it says about Joseph. Says, when he summoned a famine on the land, that's when God summoned a famine on the land and broke all supply of bread, he had sent a man ahead of them, Joseph, who was sold as a slave. His feet were hurt with fetters. His neck was put into a collar of iron until what he had said came to pass. The word of the Lord tested him. But what I want to focus on here is the man sent ahead. And Joseph says this once he reveals his identity to his brothers, and he says, what you intended for evil, God intended for good. And there's I already see you hemming and hawing, Yosef. Have I already said this? Talked about this?
He's afraid Yosef? That might trigger the old wound between us.
The old wound?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. I don't know exactly the ground I'm treading on.
It's okay. You're fine.
But I just wanted to bring up this idea of the man sent on ahead as another. We have the legal mediator that's trying to find a compromise or something in this judicial setting about justice. But then there's also I want to propose that there is this other sort of mediator. At least how I imagine it, a mediator that is the man sent on ahead. So Joseph is sent on ahead so that when the famine comes, his family is preserved and is able to be taken into Egypt. And that being the man sent ahead looks like an injustice because of all the things he has to endure. So within the framework of justice, it's not fair. He's an innocent man who's sort of given like a roughshod deal. But in the terms of being the man sent on ahead to prepare a way, he's God always refers to Job as my servant Job, as if he's always doing God's work. And so, being the man sent on ahead, not fair, not just, not anything, but it enables the family to be brought behind and preserved. Famine's the eye of a needle, and you get everyone through there that you can. So, Yosef, I want to hear your response to that.
It's interesting. I'm processing. I'm trying not to just react and speak. I'm personally here. There are a number of sort of at least midrashic connections between Joseph and Job. One.
Yeah, we've talked a little bit about this.
We talked about this, so other people can be clued in. They're both connected by Rosh Hashanah, which is coming up. So the time of year that God has the angels come to him and report, and by stating comes to him at the beginning of the book, is traditionally associated with Rosh Hashanah. and kind of the judgment of the world and God's kingship being reestablished. There's a lot of kind of Job themes in Rosh Hashanah, though we don't explicitly usually talk about it that way. And
I want to know more about Rosh
also
Hashanah now.
Rosh Hashanah is also when Joseph is freed from prison, according to the Midrash. So it's when God remembers him. So there's one connection there. There's another one which is in the Psalm 105, which is further down than you read. One of the things that Joseph does is teach the elders of Pharaoh wisdom. And in the Midrash, one of the elders of Pharaoh is Job, as we've discussed before, right? One of the three elders that he consults with, right, are Job, Elam, and Jethro, and Yitro. So there are kind of these interesting places to overlap. I'd also say, even though Joseph does not start as perfect, I mean, he's a 17-year-old kid who's doing maybe not the best things. He has a model of the world that is very insistent on, like, I understand what's right and wrong, and I'm going to tell on you. And, like, he has a very, I mean, we could call it like a childish model of the world, but like he has this model of what's proper and not proper, and in many ways, his story is him being taught a lesson in them. And there's some great work on kind of, especially looking at the baker and the steward, on Joseph and the models of Joseph and Judah, and kind of contrasting models of faith, where Joseph is very much in this world of, you stay away from bad things, and you have to keep a very clear line and separation between the two. And it's very much like a model of trying to control the world around him. And he's good at that. I mean, he's good at, and God favors him even into being able to have control. At the same time, like, it's the opposite of kind of Judah's very spontaneous impulsivity, as very kind of emotion and passion driven. And they sort of balance each other out. And there's kind of, we can go into like a whole Messiah son of Joseph, Messiah son of David, and like how those two reflect these models. But they both kind of need a little bit of each other to balance, right? They're kind of, there's like a yin yang effect there, where like Joseph needs to learn some of the lesson of Judah in flexibility and understanding, because he can't understand. Like, he is like Job in that he's like, there's a level of wisdom that is beyond him, even though he is kind of this interpreter of dreams that is so wise. And at the same time, Judah maybe needs to understand a little bit of the Joseph kind of, like, not always just kind of acting out of emotion, or impulse, or lust, or his appetites. And they both kind of get that by the end of the story. Like, they don't, unlike Job, I think they both get a level of wisdom. So yeah, I could definitely see them being connected in some interesting ways.
What do you think about the mediator as the man sent on ahead?
Yeah, so there, I was going to say, there is this general pattern in Genesis, right? Of the way that we often read Genesis is, man, all these older brothers are not treated very fairly. Like, why do they need like all of this, drama? Like, and like stealing birthrights and tricks and lies and like tension in the family. Like, there's all this pain and family problems because, like, they should just do like the normal thing, right? If they just do the normal thing, like, things would have worked out. It'd be much more fair. Like, they just follow like the model of the world that they understand as it should be. But that wouldn't work. I mean, I think what the text is arguing, and I mean, I'm drawing this from, Erica Brown has a great lecture on this, where she says that's only like half the story, because the other half of the story is like people are being chosen for leadership of a family from generation to generation. They're being chosen kind of on a meritocratic system, right? Or at least some sort of system where these are the people that God wants for their qualities, for their character traits. You can call it, I mean, you can question, maybe meritocracy isn't quite the right word, but there's sort of an inherent tension between like what's fair and like following like the normal model, and just like letting the firstborn, do their normal thing, and like allow the way of the world to happen, and not keep like trying to pray for kids for barren women, and like all these things. Just like divorce Sarah, marry another wife, marry the concubine. Like, why do you go through this whole process? But there is like a specific set of character traits that both the parents but also God are trying to cultivate in the next generation. They want those traits for the leadership of the family, and that at one level will always seem unfair to the other brothers, because like you know, why don't I get to be the leader? Like I was born first, or why you don't like my character traits or something like that. But it's not that, right? Because ultimately, what we see with the 12 tribes, and when Jacob blesses them, is that like maybe not Jacob blesses them, Moses blesses them. It's clear Jacob isn't so happy with a couple of them still. But eventually, there's a vision that all of them are supposed to work together with their strengths and their weaknesses and complement each other, and just like Joseph and Judah kind of complement each other. And the leadership role, and in fact, there's two models of leadership, and you need both. So too, like the entire nation kind of is comprised of complementary things. And one wonders, like, is there a failure of Genesis for the brothers to have worked together? Like Isaac and Ishmael eventually do work together. They bury their father. They do come together and reconcile.
Yeah.
In a couple of places, in fact. Esav and Jacob maybe sort of reconcile. It's not at the same level. There's still something there. Like Jacob never goes and catches up with his brother, even though he says he will. But they don't kill each other, and they do kiss maybe, or hug. Or there is a nice scene, but it's not like what we see through Genesis is the brothers slowly growing out of that, right? Like from Cain and Abel, where it's the complete failure of recognizing the complementary nature of relationships, and how brothers might work together, all the way like to Ephraim and Manasseh, who like don't feel any jealousy. Well, at least right, the text is not right. Jacob switches his hands; he blesses them opposite. So the younger son is with the favored hand, the right hand, and they don't fight. They don't like. There's no. They just like accept that is the new model of the world. And in fact, I would say that's strengthened even more in the Exodus, where Moses and Aaron are going to complement each other as like kind of the paradigm of like two brothers who work together as leadership roles. So I see like you're sending ahead point as sort of just part of that, right? Which is he had a specific role to play. It was not fair, but it was this role that was necessary for cultivating a certain model of leadership that was needed for the family into the next generation. And it wasn't even necessarily for like all generations, because like Judah is eventually going to get really like the multi-generation leadership. But at that time, his leadership was needed, and he was the right person to send ahead. But it's also, as I said, like it's also to cultivate within Joseph the leadership qualities he needs for the moment later, right? I mean, not that Jacob knew this beforehand, but God knew that he was not ready at 17 to do the things that he would need to do, in 30 years. Like that he needed to go through this whole process. And
do you think that's fair to attach to mediation? Seems like you're trying to define it separately. I
actually like the way that Yosef implicitly tied it to reconciliation, because I actually think that's quite specifically what the mediation is moving toward, right? And the ultimate reconciliation that the role of mediator is acting toward is the reconciliation between God and humanity, which is what Tom Burke points to in the Hangman letter. So that's the specific kind of mediator that I'm suggesting that Job is, which is why God condescends to talk to him, right? And God doesn't give him any answers, but he does condescend to talk to him, to speak to him, and to reveal things to him.
Sort of. Like,
right.
Like reveal
the answer without getting answers.
Where like he doesn't understand anything. So like
it's an anti-answer book.
Right. It's an anti-answer book. And I would say you originally asked Nate, like, do we all understand what mediator means? And the reason I said no is because initially when we were having these conversations, I was listening to Shari and Jess, like talking about the book of Job. My head, mediator was really intercessor.
Gotcha.
And I did not understand those could be decoupled. They're just the same concept to me, or like especially within Jewish kind of.
What's decoupled? Mediator and intercessor?
Yeah. And maybe they're not fully decoupled here. And I think that
because he is right. Ultimately, I mean, he ends up sacrificing on behalf of his friends, right? So he does intercede.
Yeah, it's interesting how I don't know. There's a question kind of why does he make a good mediator, intercessor if he can't pass on any of the wisdom in some sense? Like, is it
I love
right,
that.
right? Like what is it about him? And I think this is the point that the rabbis actually make about him in the Midrash is so in the Midrash that puts him as living at the time of the Exodus and Pharaoh and stuff, like they say that like the Jews can't come into the land of Israel and attack the Canaanites until Job dies. And it's because his literally there's this phrase Sartzi Lamehem, like they're the Canaanites like shadowing protection has departed from them. So they read the Midrash reads that as Job, and Job in as long as he's alive is able to sort of hold this like peace with them between them and God can't like punish them, but Job can't as much, even though he can pray for the friends to not be punished in that moment, even though he can bring the community together around him and they can like give him back his money and like all of those things where he seems to sort of heal his community. I think there is some sort of recognition that like ultimately this non-Jewish guy in this foreign land like isn't able to pass on what he has in a wisdom sense or in a like a meaningful sense.
What's coming to mind, like, is this in contrast to like what Moses does?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Because and one could say like this, there's a big difference.
Because Moses sees God face to face in the dark of the mountain, or speaks to God face to face. He sees his back.
Yeah, I would say in Vervakian terms, maybe one difference is that like Job, because it's an anti-wisdom book, like it's about ultimately like it's participatory and perspectival, and like there's something about that where like until you've lived through it, you can't experience it, and that can't be communicated. Whereas Moses, like, is setting up a very procedural. I'm not sure about propositional system, but certainly a procedural system that can be communicated and passed down and create structures. And I think
but such structures are always limited.
What?
Such structures are always limited in comparison, though. They have a limit, and that's because the wisdom.
They both have limits, but if you can't pass on participation, right? Like then what's
or perspectival unless you have an experience,
right?
Whereas you can participate in just the thing by just following the steps. You can participate in the procedural thing by just following the steps.
I mean, I would say this goes back to the whole concept around ritual, right? That ritual allows one to do this deep play into living, into the participation and potentially into enough if you do it enough and like it becomes perspectival that it creates a system, because otherwise like you can't copy the Job system. The Job system is have all your kids die, gets really sick, have your house get destroyed, have all your wealth get destroyed. Like that's not a replicable system. No one would want to. I mean, I was like, there were people like, I think Baz told me about this, right? It's in North Africa, early Christians who thought that the only way you could be saved was if you died a martyr's death. So they provoked their self-martyrdom but that's like Christianity rightly rejected that as like this is not really the way that this works, because like that's the Job thing or the martyrdom thing is not how you pass on a tradition. Like you'll die out really quickly if you do that, but also like from a pragmatic perspective, but also like that's not the point. It's like people who say like kind of from some camps of antinomianism that like you should sin because if you sin then you have the opportunity to repent. But like of course that's not true. Like that sort of sinning isn't going to bring true repentance because it's already like poison. Like, right? like it's not like you've missed the point. If
you need to repent of thinking about it like that.
So like I know that the procedural has limitations. I get that. Like and it has to be like there's a lot to be argued about a living tradition and like if it becomes too static and like how do you maintain this and make it keep its relevance over years to still bring you to the same participatory perspectival perspectives. Like there's lots to be talked
Well,
about.
also, but the procedural isn't completely divorced from participation. And I would say, particularly if you look at like in Barfield's model of final participation, the thing that distinguishes final participation from original participation is that final participation is done consciously. And there's a way in which procedural, like doing things procedurally and consciously, helps to build us into that more conscious mode of participation.
Is that
because he also says that original participation is simply paganism, because what happens in original participation is just like the god gets a hold of you and that's it. Like there's no it doesn't really it definitely can actually take away your agency, whereas final participation is definitely something that is it's an evolution of consciousness, because it's a movement of consciousness toward participation that is making it no longer an unconscious and automatic act. That's why there's always a sort of
intentional and mindful.
Yeah, exactly.
The only way to do that is, in some ways, like practicing mindfulness through of the procedural and not letting it become. And maybe we could talk about this with Job too, like not letting it become like, okay, every time my kids have a feast, I'm going to go through this this procedure. Right. That is entire. It's an automatic like mechanistic view of like how to heal sin, right? Like in theory, I mean that's what it seems.
Yeah, I wonder. Well, how do you think the perspectival? So there's, I'm picturing that Job has basically a perspectival transformation that happens. And I would say that the perspectival is sort of the main contents of God's speech. It's offering up not only just one perspective, like from God, it's offering up many perspectives. Like it's offering up the perspective of the ostrich and the perspective of the where whose womb did the ice come from? And all of a sudden you're like, whose womb? And like then you're imagining where the womb of the ice is, and because God's speech is not talking about propositions, it's not talking about procedures. It's in some sense it's participatory because you're just in the world. Like it's the world you're in, but isn't it trying to give Job a new perspective? So one example is like Job will say, God shakes the foundations of the earth, its pillars tremble. And this is in one of his speeches where he's recounting the greatness of God, but he recounts it in this way where God shakes the foundations, the pillars tremble. And then when God brings up the foundations of the pillars, he says, where were you when I laid the foundations? Do you know on what the pillars are sunk? And so you can hear the difference in the perspective. Job is talking about the shaking and the trembling, and then God is talking about the founding and establishing, and all throughout God's speech, he's doing the shift. So the Eliphaz will talk about the lions as being hungry, God shutting their mouths, putting them in their place, because the lions are like a metaphor for the wicked. And so like God will break the jaws of the lion. And then when God talks about the hungry lion, he talks about them waiting in the thicket, waiting for their food, and asks the question, who provides the food for them? Sort of implying that he does. He's taking care of them in this sort of paternal way, the same way Job's father had taken care of widows and orphans. God is taking care of lions. And it's this, so these, I would characterize those as perspectival shifts.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a full shift, but I think it's like introducing enough weirdness to like make a question, right? So like you get like a weird result.
To at least put them in tension.
Right, you get a weird result in an experiment, and then you suddenly like is my theory of gravity correct? Like whatever it is, right? There's something wrong. There's like a little bit of evidence, and you can choose to ignore it. You can try to throw out the data point, but God isn't going to let that happen, right? In his speech, like he's going to say, like, no, like this is with the columns, with the trembling of that itself is like an important metaphor in Tanakh for injustice being done, right? So like there's a whole other kind of layer to that Job is bringing up, saying like,
no, but it works still.
Yeah, it's still totally. It works even more strongly in some ways because God is saying it's actually about like, how do you know the pillars on which I establish justice? What is justice? Like what strengthens it? What gives it? And also, I don't know how long we're going for actually, but I'm
kind of open ended, so whenever you guys want to call it good.
I gotta say something for North Carolina, boys.
Yeah, we should definitely. Well, we'll also have Sherry with us, so
that's right. It'll go in totally different directions. Yeah,
I'm not worried about it.
I'm bummed Sherry could make it, and happy birthday, Sherry.
Oh, was it her birthday?
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Sherry.
Also, there is this line. I think it's the line, literally the one right after the part that Nate quoted from 19 in the Hangman there. So right after he sees God from his flesh, the next thing he says is, I'm going to translate it just on the fly because I don't love the translation in front of me. So that I would see it for myself with my own eyes and not a stranger. It's 1927.
I can read it. You want me to read it?
I don't know if I want your translation.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm going to say, like, so that I see it for myself, and it's not in that strange, like that only I can see, right? Like when my flesh beholds God without the garments of skin, right? Like it is something that like I need to see for myself, only I can see, and someone can't see it for me, right? Like that's a very like critical line, I think, in some ways, because it ties to all this stuff we're saying that like this is non-transferable and this is perspectival, and like this is like he's even anticipating it, right? The same way that we kind of anticipate perspectival changes by like doing deep play and practicing and like whatever. Like he's already in chapter 19, so like halfway through the book, not even quite. He's already anticipating this potential for perspectival shifts, but he like doesn't. It hasn't undergone it yet. Like he knows it's possible. He's like hoping for it, but like in some ways, like I see this section really tied to his final response to God, which is I had heard and now I've seen, because you get that same parallel here where he talks about kind of hearing and seeing, but like he's like looking forward to the seeing that he just can't do yet, and it requires him like to basically like, I wouldn't say die, but like for his flesh to fall off, for his kidneys to kalu, to perish, right? Like which kidneys are where the seat of wisdom is in biblical.
Interesting.
Right. So he's like all these things, but he has to see it for himself. Like it can't be transferred, and he has to lose like all of these things, his wisdom, his skin, his like in order for this to occur. Yeah.
Well, and that's why he wants God to respond, is because he knows he doesn't have it. Like and he lacks the resources for it. And so that's why he's adamant that God makes some sort of statement towards him, and that God, by remaining silent and keeping him in the dark, sort of is adding to the calamities.
Yeah, and also that like why despite all his friends trying, even that Elihu tries, whether you think Elihu is good or bad or whatever, like they can't do a perspectival shift for him. Like they can argue about propositions all day, they can argue about good, bad all day, morality, right? But they can't cause him to undergo this perspectival shift. Now, there's a question like, why can God when they can't? Like, what is it? Because is it God's speech? Because remember, God doesn't only speak, right? He comes in a storm. Like there's a very other level kind of participation going on here. It's not just like people sitting around and talking to each other, but there's like literally he gets thrown into a physical storm. Is what, like we hear the storm building. At least it keeps referencing the storm clouds gathering and the thunder starting, right? Like we hear the storm is building in the end of Elijah's speech, and then it hits. And somehow in that, and obviously Elijah references are like very obvious here, but like though it's maybe it's sort of the inverse of Elijah. Sometimes we need to hear God in the silence, and sometimes we do need to hear God in the storm. Like that's how we can, for Job, God is a God of storm. Right? He's not the God of the still silent voice after the storm. There is another level of participation that's I don't want us to like just drop out and like don't just focus on God's speech and not the physical thing that the book is telling us is happening at the same time.
Yeah, well, and the wind also refers to the wind that struck the four corners of his children's house and it collapsed. And it also refers to the when the friends and Job are hurling insults at each other, they'll say they'll be like I forget the phrase, but they say what do they say? Like your words are just wind. Like they're nothing. They mean it just it goes and it's gone. And then Job even says of himself, like, why do you even listen to me? I'm a man who's almost dead, whose words are just like wind or something. He says that too, like it means nothing. But the whirlwind is like when wind is gathered to this sort of point, not only where it's not nothing, it's really something. and not only because wind is normally not visible, but in the whirlwind, it all of a sudden is visible. So that which was invisible is now visible. And not only that which sort of means nothing now has gathered into some sort of a force strong enough to have this effect.
Yeah, I mean, wind. We can have a whole discussion. Wind comes up a lot.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's more than that too. But those are some things in Job that I think in the book itself that.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Well,
so all right. So bring it back to Mediator. Job has this interaction with God. It's sort of Moses plays a role is Moses a mediator? I guess I should ask, because Moses has an interaction with God, and in a lot of ways, I think the book of Job draws on the imagery of Sinai. So, but in not overt ways, but in little ways. So, just for example, Moses goes up the mountain to meet God, and then Job meets God on the ash heap, this tiny little mountain. Job talks about all the different kinds of darkness. There's the darkness, the thick darkness, the darkness of the clouds, and the same darknesses. Like there's like 5 different darknesses he refers to in one passage, and it's the same darknesses that are described about Sinai when it's covered, and so there's these illusions in the, it's not a direct metaphor or anything, but there's this illusions of imagery where like when you hear Job say those kinds of darknesses, you think back to those darknesses about Sinai, and you're like, and then when God finally speaks to him, and then it at least puts those things into conversation with each other. So anyway, what is Moses a mediator?
yes and no, right? Moses. I mean, because there's a split leadership role. Aaron has some of the mediation roles, and Moses has some, and they're not the same. And that's like there is an important distinction there. And there's a reason they're separated. And I don't know that Job is more one versus the other necessarily. I could kind of, I think that
You mean more Moses or more Aaron?
right. Like I think in some ways he's more Aaron, kind of in his praying, priestly sort of role. Not that Moses never prays for people, but I think the language describes him is in some ways closer to, the Aaron mode. It doesn't mean that the Sinai parallels aren't there. Aaron was there too, right? Like it's just, there's a lot to think about that. But yeah, I mean, Moses is a mediator. I don't think that's like a question. It's just like, is Moses the same type of mediator as Job? I don't necessarily think so. In fact, one of the big thing that Moses can't do, according to God, is Moses cannot forgive the people on behalf of God. If they sin against God, Moses does not have that intercessor or mediation role, right? That only Aaron can do. Only Aaron can bear their sins. And in some way, like at least Job at the end of the book, like he is mediating for these people for how they spoke wrongly against God. So that's like an Aaron thing. Bringing sacrifices because people might have sinned is an Aaron thing. So I think probably it's closer to that, but
because Moses brings down the law and the plans for the tabernacle, and there's nothing like that in Job.
Right. And then there's also the parallel with Aaron's, his sons dying in fire, right? Like there is a very clear parallel with that. And he kind of is silent, at least initially. Actually, a lot like Job. Initially, there's silence, and then there is a small protest when Moses critiques him on how he does one of the didn't consume the sacrifices. He does push back on him. But yeah, there is this. There might be more of a motif there to explore. I haven't really thought about it before.
I was expecting Nate to say something.
I was grabbing another lozenge for my throat, for my sore throat, so I muted. No, I think that's right. I think that's good. I think so. I think we are agreeing that Job is some kind of mediator. We just are like, we want to be precise about saying what kind of mediator he is. So.
Well, in terms of the crisis that sort of is at the heart of it, that are the righteous only doing things for, the blessings that God gives, or the righteous actually, could there actually be righteous people? And he, I think he, I think when I see a connection between that and then why everyone comes into his house at the end. So during his sufferings, everyone sort of abandons him. They shun him. It's very much a Gerardian scapegoat kind of thing. But then once God appears, Job does the sacrifice for the friends, or his friends bring the sacrifice, Job does the prayer. It says then God restores Job. And I think it's supposed to be sort of read like God's doing the restoring, but here's how he restores it. Everyone that knew Job before, all his family and friends, then came to him and brought him a piece of gold and a ring, something like that, or a ring of gold and a piece of silver or something. And this is like, I almost think of it as, I heard someone say once, I don't know if I think it this strongly, but this is how God restores Job. The people, and then they come and they comfort him. And it's in the people realizing the kind of man Job is that he is restored and that his wealth is brought back. And so that whole thing is like a powerful thing to me, that Job would do this towards all these people and was able to solve the crisis because they all thought that the whole game was rigged and that you know, it is. I don't know if that make. I mean, that's the feeling that I get from it and what's happening there. And then everyone comes into his house and they eat bread with him. It's interesting that there's no wine or oil mentioned, but they eat bread in the house of Job. And I think of that as like saying the crisis has been this crisis of faith in righteousness in itself has been averted and solved, and it was through Job and his suffering that did this. I feel like I'm stretching.
Yeah. So it's interesting because I pulled up the chapter, and the word that's translated as restored, I assume in your text, this is 42:10, the second and third, fourth word of that sentence, is not the word for actually restore in Hebrew. And it's kind of interesting because, and maybe actually we should go up one sentence before. So he tells, do the sacrifice on their behalf because the word, God spoke to Eliphaz and says, I'm angry at you. Right? He doesn't actually tell Job, right? This is an important kind of, maybe we'll go through it for a second. After the Lord spoke these words to Job, which is like the whole big speech in chapters 41, beginning 40, 41, beginning 42, then God does not speak to Job. Then he speaks to Eliphaz, right? And he says, hey, Eliphaz, the Temanite, I am angry at you and how your two friends for how you talked about me improperly to my servant Job. And now take 7 bulls and 7 rams, go to my servant Job, and bring them up as a sacrifice. So it's interesting. It's not clear actually that Job's doing the sacrifice, or if but it seems that what he's asking them is, he's saying them, you should offer these sacrifices on your behalf, and my servant Job will pray for you, or upon you, will pray upon you, for I will lift his face, so I will have him show favor. Now, it's a kind of interesting thing. Is it God showing favor to Job or Job showing favor to his friends? It's kind of an interesting ambiguity.
Well, you could see it as Job feeling honored that his friends would ask this of him.
Yeah.
Is that what you're getting at?
Potentially. I'm going to go a little bit somewhere else, but
okay. Go ahead.
Let me just finish the passage, and then so that I do not do something nevala. This is actually the same word we had earlier at the very beginning with the word that Job uses to describe his wife's foolishness, like bad foolishness. So God doesn't do something foolishly bad to the friend, which is kind of a weird thing to say of God.
It's funny.
Making them foolishly bad in some way, because you did not speak properly as my servant Job did. And then Eliphaz the Temanite and Bildad the Shuhite and Zophar the Naamati did the thing that God tells them to do, and God either shows favor to Job, or the more actually literal translation is God causes Job to show favor. So essentially, like by them going to him with these sacrifices, I think this is a reconciliation, right? This is them saying, like, I mean, either we're sorry or God told us to say we're sorry. I don't know, but let's say that they actually mean it. Like we realize we messed up, and that you were right, and find favor in your eyes. And in fact, we have this language with Abraham when after Elimelech kidnaps Sarah, and then God comes to him in a dream and he tells him return Sarah to the man. He's the prophet. We have this very similar language where God tells Abimelech. He tells Abimelech to go to Abraham and have Abraham pray on his behalf. And it's the same, like, you have to make up with that person to the point that they feel like they are concerned about your welfare and want to protect you from God's punishment, even God's just punishment. That's how far your reconciliation has to go.
That they would, is this like an intercession? They would intercede on your behalf?
So it's a sort of intercession on your behalf, but it's also like that's the second step almost. Like the first step before, like, and then in fact, I mean, I know we've avoided New Testament references, and I appreciate that. But there is like that scene where, like, I don't remember which gospel it's in, where like the guy is told, like, I think Jesus tells him, like, drop like the thing you're bringing to the temple and go make up with your fellow first before you can bring a sacrifice, right? It's very much like that, where you have to like make up, like you have to reconcile, like to an extreme degree, almost like to the point, not just where like, okay, fine, like whatever, I forgive you, bye, I don't want to talk to you again. Like you have to really reconcile to the point where they care about your well-being, and want to plead on your behalf as an intercessor or mediator, whatever, to God on your behalf, so that he is merciful in his attitude toward you, right? So this, I think it's more than just like, originally how you understood the favorite Job, about like, and just like, oh, I feel good about you guys again, but like a really deep teshuvah.
Yeah, that's good, man. That's good.
Repentance process, the reconciliation process has to happen. And then what happens, and this is what the verse I really wanted to bring, is 42:10.
Okay.
And then this is the one that's usually translated as restore, but like the words are of course a little weird, but it's like, and then God returned what's this called?
Translated fortunes.
Return the captives, the captivity of Job. It's almost like a very exilic language, really, like or redemption from exile. He returned Job from his captivity because he prayed on behalf of his friends. It's literally, there's a because there, right? Like it connects the two clauses. And then God restored, and then it says, and then God adds to him double what he had, right? So then you get that section. But the initial phrase isn't restoring; it's this language of returning, but returning in the sense of like both a captivity and also like metanoia, returning, like teshuvah, like the word we use for repentance in Hebrew, is this shat, and this is like the same word we get in Deuteronomy for like you should return to your God. With your full heart after you have sinned and experienced exile and come back, right? So there is this kind of interesting, like we can talk about, did Job ever sin and does he need repentance? But at some level, there is kind of repentance-like language here, but it's also this like healing from exile type language that we get, and it is Job's exile from his community, from his family, from his, right, all those things. Like he was in exile in a sense, in a real way. So it's not just metaphorical language. I think it's in some ways like a literal point being made, but it's only because he only gets returned and restored because he prays on their behalf. Not because of all the other things, not because he had some deeper wisdom from God, but because he's able to accept their apology, because he's able to reconcile, because he's able to go through this process, and God helps him. And it says God, helps him find favor, but like that, I think, is really the restoration of Job in this process. And it's not about the sacrifice; it's about the prayer. Right? In fact, it seems like the friends actually do their own sacrifices. Is sort of what it seems like. It doesn't say he actually does the sacrifice. All it says is he's praised. But in that prayer and in that ability to come to that point where he can pray on their behalf again after all that pain they caused him, that is where we get this breakthrough. He's able to be restored.
All right, which the point of the role of mediator toward reconciliation. This is what I was hinting towards. So I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Do you think? Okay, I was just thinking of this while you're going through all that. I was like, couldn't this have happened in chapter 3 or 4? Does God appear just to force the issue? Because even when you're saying like how God's like, don't make me do something stupid, like and because of how you acted, don't let me act foolishly. It's almost like God is playing, because all throughout God's speeches is sort of the ostrich. There's just sort of this, it ends with Leviathan. Like there's a chaotic element to God's speech that maybe has shocked the friends. And so when God says this to them, they're I might.
Well, yeah, because for the friends need something to happen in order for them to see that as the face of God, right? Because the God they believe in is only a God of order, where things happen in the way that they're supposed to have by people behaving in the way they're supposed to. So
Right.
the God that is the God of chaotic potential is the one that they don't understand or know.
It's a little
about.
bit too crazy, and
right.
and it's actually in God's mercy that He would give them something sort of concrete to do. He's like, I'm crazy out here. Why don't you do this? And they're like, okay, we'll do that. And he's like, oh, then things will kind of be restored.
So I don't know if the friends I don't know if the friends experience the storm the way that Job does. Like I'm not sure they encounter God that way. I think it's an interesting question to think about. Like I could see that reading, but like it's certainly not. I don't see the text implying it at all. And like
no, it's
in
not
some
implied.
way, perhaps where they actually see God is not in the storm at all, but in Job's actions,
right?
In his praying for them. Like yes, God has to like tell them to like start this process, and they're like, oh, well, this seems normal. God tells us, okay, we messed up, and this seems like the mechanistic world we're used to. But they can't count on Job like acting the way that they expect after all this stuff has happened. Like the last interaction they had with him was really bitter. Like he was
really
like,
bad.
He was like, get away from me. Like, I wish you guys would just like die. Okay, he doesn't quite say that, but pretty darn close, right? Like he's really upset with them.
Yeah.
And so
Job calls them wicked, almost.
Does call them wicked, yeah, for how they treated him. Absolutely. Wherever that is in 30 or something.
Yeah.
So like, yeah, like I would just say like there's a very like I think there's another like kind of nice way to read that, which is that they see the way they see God and experience God is through Job's actions in reconciling with them and being willing to pray on their behalf after all that. And they realize that he must have undergone some transformation, and they may not understand it, but like, the fact that they can see God now in his behavior,
right,
way, and that he's undergone a transformation might be enough for him to like, now there's a question on like whether he ever mediates for them again beyond this like feast, beyond this one final interaction. Like we know that he has this family, and the family like has generations and all this stuff, but like it's not so clear what happens to the rest of the community.
Yeah, it seems the major change is that the daughters are included in the inheritance. That seems to be like that's the thing that. Well, it seems like that's the thing that's sort of like it's even towards the end, and it's the thing that sort of is like mentioned that will impact future generations.
Yeah. Now, on the one hand, like that is standard Aramean practice, unlike Jewish practice. So, like, it's maybe just putting him back into like, hey, he's not Jewish, and like reminder that like they have different, like a very like way to talk about that. Another way to talk about it though is like, well, we do have these other examples of Jewish women, like these rare examples in the Bible where we have Jewish women inherit, and like maybe we should draw a comparison between them and the most famous case, which is the Michlanoah, Tirzah, who are in
when all the brothers in the family died, and
so the father died. There were no brothers.
Right.
This is the daughters of
who was going to inherit it.
So they were allowed to inherit like ancestral land in Israel. Now, it's not just like you inherit for one generation, but this is like you guys get to be part of the lottery for like with all the tribes and like have established lands that will be your descendants forever, right? Like it's like a very different level. But like it's so that one could you can talk about comparisons there. It's not so clear. Depends on how you want to read Job and how Jewish, I mean, as I've told you, like I'm convinced, like I think a Jew had to have written this text. It's like it's just so monotheistic, and there's no other real contenders for like such strict Canaanite speaking monotheists like in the region. But the fact that it seems that they make Job a non-Jew, I think is a really kind of important point. Like it allows for a much broader, more universal kind of message going on here.
Yeah.
There was something earlier you said about, gosh, it was like a lot earlier. How Job is commenting on kind of this this much bigger change, like not just his own situation, but kind of a change kind of that's going on in the world more broadly, between like good people, like doing good things, being rewarded, and bad things. Like kind of, I don't like the actual age hypothesis, but like the thing that generally is being shorthanded being described that way. I think potentially, this is one of the reasons I think that the book makes a lot of sense at the beginning of the Second Temple period. Like that there is this change in people, like the Jewish people having undergone this massive, the destruction of the temple, the exile, coming back. They don't know what's going to happen with the Second Temple. Like there's going to be, like the restoration of the sons and daughters of Job. Like they're going to have a Second Temple, right? They're going to be able to build that. That's why I think it is probably in that framing time period. But at the same time, like their worldview has shattered on because the people in Jeremiah's time, if you remember, in the book of Jeremiah, and I think Ezekiel too, right? They say well, God would never destroy his temple. Like even if he punishes us, like that's fine. Like we did bad things, God punishes us. Like we understand that system, but like it would be crazy for God to destroy like the place that is his temple that's been standing for hundreds of years and is his presence in the world, like shows his presence to the world.
Yeah,
like that's a step too far, and their worldview shatters, right? Like, and they don't, and in some ways, like one of the big things in this early Second Temple prophets is they keep having to tell the people, hey, maybe you should build this temple. God really, he would like you to do that. And the people just aren't doing it. And they're the prophets say you're not doing it because you're like trying to build your own houses and you're concentrating on your own lives and, and other things that are going on. Like there's famine going on, but if you built the temple, the famine would end because the famine is actually punishment. Like they're trying to like navigate this, but I think there's like a lot less confidence that like in their old model that the temple like will protect them from like will be like this foundation stone, right? Like because the pillar of the earth, the temple has been shaken or destroyed. They no longer have the confidence, and I think maybe that's part of their hesitancy in the rebuilding because they don't know like exactly why they're doing this anymore. Like, do they stay? Do they keep doing Jewish stuff? Do they become Persians?
Wasn't there also like when they start? It may have been after they started building it, or maybe they only were back in Jerusalem, but there weren't any people that were pure enough to be the priests or the Levites. Wasn't that something?
So in the initial returnees, there are some people, but one of the really big things that inspires Ezra's like migration from Babylon. So he leads.
It doesn't. Yeah, he like laments the fact that he can't find anyone that's of a strict lineage that could fulfill some of these. I might be remembering wrong. It's been a while.
I'm not sure if I remember that part. I do know that Ezra makes a point. I mean, he's a priest, and he makes a point of bringing back a bunch of priests with him. There are some priests, though, because we know Joshua is the priest with the return of the very first exiles in the first wave. There aren't Levites, though, right? That was a problem. Not that you need Levites for the temple service, but there aren't Levites, and Ezra has trouble recruiting them, but eventually he gets like some to come with him, and basically like rebuilds the Levites from the few returnees that agree.
Yeah.
I can't remember. I don't remember there being off the top of my head. I don't know.
But I kind of remember. I can't find it. Maybe but I kind of remember Ezra saying like I can't find anyone who hasn't intermarried with foreigners that would have. Yeah. And this is part of Ezra's.
So that's later. I mean, so remember, Ezra's coming back in the second wave of returnees, and when he comes back, it's not so clear because is he talking to the people he comes back with? Is he talking to the people that he finds when he gets there? But we do know that the main priestly lineage, the leaders of the priests at least, have intermarried, and that is like a big point of contention. And Ezra in the book of Nehemiah, and also in I think Zechariah, I think 3 books bring up like the intermarriage issue, and like they all kind of navigated a little bit differently. In fact, I think Nehemiah ends up having to address it twice because like it doesn't get resolved the first time he addresses it, and he's only a couple years after Ezra. Like so, people are having a really hard time kind of working through this intermarriage issue.
Yeah, because in order to fulfill the law kind of as strictly as they would like it sort of became impossible. There's like some things in the law they wouldn't be able to do.
Potentially, yeah. There's
or in the rituals.
Certainly their understanding of the priests. I mean, this.
Yeah, we don't need to get. Let's kind of taking too far of a rabbit trail.
But yeah, and we're gonna go far from Job probably.
But as far as like Job as being a book that has plenty to say to the Jewish situation in the exile and then the second, beginning of the Second Temple period, like you could see why Job became so important.
Right.
Like if it wasn't written then, like it sort of, I don't know, like even if it existed before, it may have really proved important in that period in a way that other books, or it was just very important because of the situation.
And I think that's part of going back to like one of the very first things you said, like how did this end up in the Bible? Like, I think part of that is because it was so salient to that experience. That we don't even we have a record. I mean, we can talk about how accurate it is, but like there's rabbinic oral tradition over debates over which books to canonize. Job is not one of the books that's debated. It's assumed that it's going to be canonized, which is kind of an interesting thing. You might think, given some of the material in it, that there might be a debate, but we don't really have it. As far as I can think, like we have, there's the debates over Ecclesiastes and Song of Songs and Esther, but not Job.
Not Job. It's interesting.
And that's, I think that just attests to like, and in some ways, it's not actually so weird, especially like in that context, because we do have those couple Psalms, we do have Lamentations, we have Abraham, protesting God off the bat, right, in Genesis, where there was a space for this sort of challenging literature, even in kind of this like high religious, level of discussion, and they weren't necessarily shying away from it, and that is interesting. I know when we talked about before, like in the ancient Near East, there aren't a lot of parallels to Job. Like the closest one is the negative confession, or I guess there's two. It is like a Babylonian negative confession, and then there's an Egyptian one. But they parallel like the part where like Job is saying like I'm innocent, but they don't really parallel like this whole struggle with like the Odyssey. Right?
The book of Job is so much more complex and it's much longer, first of all, but then it's much more complex and deals with so much more than those other.
Well, and also if we're right about Job acting as a mediator and a mediator towards reconciliation, it's actually a work that is giving the same non-answer to the problem of the Odyssey that David Bentley Hart does in Doors of the Sea, because David Bentley Hart just keeps pointing at reconciliation.
Yeah, so I don't know that work well enough. So
you should read it sometime. It's very short. It's the book he wrote in response to the tsunami in Bangladesh in like 2008. Yeah.
So to wrap up, what if the book of Job has anything to say about mediation? Why would it be like important for us today? I find it like endlessly fascinating, but I'm also like sort of struck by there's an impracticality of it, because it's not, you can't just make a bunch of rules from it or create necessarily liturgies or traditions other than just reading it and going through it, discussing it. So
Jess, you need to answer. Right, exactly. Which is why you need to answer your own question, because I
don't know. That's the problem. Okay. I have no idea, Nate.
Okay.
And it's like that with a lot of stuff in life. So it's not to even belittle myself or the book. It's just like some things are so important you have no idea why, and that's the sense I get of it. but then like I see other people and they don't get it, and then they don't even care. And that always sort of, I kind of, sometimes I'm just like, isn't this just like self-evident? Like, isn't this just obvious? But people don't feel the same way. And they'll actually do things when they discuss the book of Job, if they do discuss it at all, and they'll do it to dismiss it in some way. And it may be something slight. It may be something small to just sort of like wrap it up with a bow and just sort of put it there, because it has a tendency to like, ever expand. And, I understand when people don't want to go through it. But
it's a very long book. It's a very hard book. I mean, the language in it, like the Hebrew, is especially all the middle chapters outside of the framing ones at the end, like are incredibly difficult, right? I don't know that it was a book written necessarily for the masses, in the sense of, even though it's canonized and even though it's important, even though it shows this, I don't actually know like that it was meant to be a particularly accessible or useful or easy book. And in some ways, I think one of the things that one can learn sort of from the book is just like how like it makes space for other kind of individual experiences of God and protests and stories and participatory interactions that are not communicable. Like it's kind of like a book that teaches you that you can't actually teach things through books, right? Like at some level, that you have to figure this out for yourself, and like there's an limit. There's actually so there's a book called Me'ori Naim, illuminating the eyes, and in that it's more a early modern period, I think, Jewish piece of rabbinic literature, and he says, if you read a book and you think you know more at the end of it than when you started, then you've read it wrong. That what you should when you finish reading the book, you should realize how much more you don't know. And that is the goal, right? It's the education and reading and these things should teach you ever increasingly about intellectual humility. And if there's anything that this book does, it's that. Like this book in every way, both in how it's written, its complexity, its style, the fact that it's easy to dismiss because it is so hard, that it has weird things, that it has lessons that you're like, these don't seem very religious, orthodox, whatever lessons. But also like the way the actual content of the book ends, right? Or like God saying, like, you're not gonna understand any of this. Like it's all really about intellectual humility ultimately. And you're supposed to, I think, this book if there's any book like that, right, it's this one where you're supposed to end reading this book and realize how much you don't understand.
So it's a book that promotes learned ignorance.
It's apophatic.
I like intellectual humility. Okay, whatever term you prefer.
Learned ignorance. That's Nicholas Cusa's term.
I see.
Yeah.
Nate, do you have any closing thoughts as we?
No, I just want to make sure that we mention that if this conversation will be happening again with Sherry on the stage at Southeastuary. There are still tickets available. Southeastuary.com. Go get your ticket today, and you can see these fine gentlemen. And I will be on stage moderating all the dialogue, so you get to see me too. And then we have a couple of individual presentations that are going to be worked into. We've got Esther Meek coming. She's going to present to us for about an hour, and Michael Martin is going to do like 30 minutes of philosophy and poetry and song wove together in the way that only Michael Martin does. So Paul Vanderglay is coming. John Van Donk is coming. We've got a musical guest Friday night at the Scotsman Pub in Waynesville. Her name is Murphy Campbell. She has a YouTube site. You can look her up. She's very good. She's a traditional banjo player and singer in the traditional Appalachian style. And we're going to have a campfire sing-along on Saturday night led by Michael Martin.
Oh, really?
And,
that's awesome.
Yeah, it's gonna be a good time. Oh, and I'm cooking barbecue on Thursday. So if you decide to come, make sure you're there at least a day early so you can come to the barbecue on Thursday.
I'm going to be there.
All right.
Dude, I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking
Yeah.
forward to seeing both of you. Yosef, see you.
Yeah, for sure.
It'd be great seeing you guys in person.